Då är klockan 12 och ni är varmt välkomna till den här Investor Update med Xspray Pharma. Jag heter Jakob Nyberg och ska moderera den här timmen som jag hoppas att vi kommer få mycket intressant information om hur arbetet fortskrider på Xspray Pharma. Jag önskar er välkomna som tittar online. Ni som tittar live idag 24 klockan 12 kommer kunna ställa frågor i Youtubechatten och vi har en frågestund i slutet där vi gör vårt bästa för att fånga upp de frågor ni har. Vi har också en publik i rummet som vi önskar välkomna. Ni får också ställa frågor i slutet och vi kommer att ha en kvart precis i slutet för det räknar vi med. Och det går också att vi kommer ställa frågor under presentationerna i mån av förtydliganden, men annars så sparar vi frågorna till slutet. Med oss idag har vi Per Andersson, vd på Xspray Pharma som ska inleda. Därefter så har vi ju Dr. Adrian Kilcoyne som är CMO och som representerar Xspray i kraft av det strategiska samarbetet med partnern Eversana. Och därefter så kommer vi också att få lyssna på Edward Jordan som är CCO, Commercial Officer på plats vid marknaden i USA, som också kommer berätta om kommersialiseringen. Men vad ni ska berätta om får ni berätta om själva, så att jag lämnar ordet till Per.
Tack så mycket och tack för att ni tittar. Vi kommer idag att gå igenom, en brief company update, en review av kliniken, alltså på vilket sätt den här föreningen förbättrar läget för patienter, hur marknadsarbetet går tillsammans med oss och Eversana, och sen så får ni tillfälle att ställa era frågor. Men om vi börjar med en update då. Xspray är ett plattformsbolag. Jag vill stressa det så att ni förstår att det är inte ett enproduktsbolag. Det vi gör är att vi har sett att det kommer massor av proteinkinashämmare. Den mest säljande typen av cancerläkemedel i USA just nu. Det finns 84 stycken och den lilla grafen visar hur den här tillväxten av olika produkter har skett från 2020, alltså bara de senaste 20 åren. De är nu uppe i över 30 miljarder dollar och de är 84 stycken. Vår teknologi, vår Hynap-teknologi som vi har jobbat med de senaste 10-15 åren på riktigt och har skalat upp de senaste 5 åren för att kunna göra produkter av. Den har vi lyckats att faktiskt förbättra lösligheten och förbättra de här befintliga produkterna. 20 stycken PKI:er har vi lyckats så här, mer än 20 har vi lyckats få att fungera i våran maskin. Så vi har ett ovanligt instrument där det funkar med en samma hammare för alla skruvar, höll jag på att säga. Det är inte helt riktigt där, men det här gör att vi får en lägre kostnad till en lägre risk i våran affärsidé, eftersom vi har en teknologiplattform som skapar förbättrade produkter, och det är produkter som redan finns på marknaden. Och vi är det som är spännande idag, det är att vi är några månader ifrån att kunna lansera våran första produkt. Men det här är alltså ett flerproduktbolag, och det ni ser i de här bollarna, produktbollarna, det är vår första CML-produkt, vår första CML-portfölj. Det är en leukemiportfölj med 2-4 PKI:er i. Ni vet 2 av dem, 004 och 003, Dasatinib, alltså Dasano och Nilotinib. Sen så har vi njurcancer. Där har vi 2-4 PKI:er som kommer. Det kommer lite senare eftersom patenten går ut lite senare. Heter XX008 och den produkten som vi har tagit ut som ni fick veta mer om i förrgår, XX015. Och sen har vi ett antal solidtumörer här som kommer som ett brev på posten, patentutgången, och de är riktigt stora. Så vi pratar om att vi adresserar en marknad på 10-20, kanske till och med 30 miljarder dollar om 5-10 år. Vi tar ju naturligtvis blockbuster-varianterna och jobbar med, men just nu har vi 4 utav de här som vi har lyckats skalat upp. Om vi tittar på den senaste då, Cabozantinib, Hynap Cabo. Den har en njurcancerförening som säljer bara i USA för 1,1 miljarder, 1,6 miljarder dollar 23, och sen ser ni hur utvecklingen spås för den. Det som händer där är nästan revolutionerande, eller är revolutionerande. Man börjar få folk tillsammans med de checkpoint-inhibitorerna så får man en betydligt bättre överlevnad nu. Så det är en väldigt spännande produkt, och kan man förbättra den så är det speciellt viktigt i kombinationshänseende, för att här har vi många substanser som ska in i kroppen och samtidigt behandla cancern. Det är Exelixis, bolaget som har den här produkten, heter just nu Cabometyx, som finns på marknaden, och som sagt, den här ser vi vilken indikationer de är. Det finns 3 stycken generika, alltså andra, som kommer in på den amerikanska marknaden, och den första har settlat till 31, vilket betyder att patentet för substansen går ut 26 och sekundärpatentet går ut 33, men antagligen blir generiskt någonstans runt 31. Så 56 års exklusivitet kan man se, med exklusivitet kan man tänka sig det. Kan Xspray komma in med en amorf version som inte bryter mot några patent, så kommer vi kunna lansera i det här fönstret, vilket är väldigt värdefullt. Och det här bilden visar ungefär hur det ser ut. Det här gör då att man kan kapitalisera på den här perioden när det bara finns en högprisad exklusiv produkt på den. Nu är det väl så att när vi har kommit in i Dasatinib här och får en lite kortare sånt fönster, så ser vi att det är väl inte helt nödvändigt med den här patentfönstret. Har man en rejäl förbättring så betyder det också att i ett livshotande sjukdomsläge så betyder det att man kan komma in på marknaden till väldigt bra pris. Orsaken till det är ju till stor del att priset håller sig på nästan alla de här produkterna, PKI-produkterna som vi har sett. Vi brukar få frågorna om vad händer när generika kommer in. Ja, här har vi Sutent eller Sunitinib som också är en njurförening, och vi ser hur den priset ändrades på de 24 månader. Till slut är det 30% skillnad efter 2 år. Men det är ju mest på grund av att originalpriset, den gröna, har höjts under tiden. Så det här är månadskostnaden ni ser på vänsterarmen, eller på vänstersidan också, så att ni förstår vilken typ av prisbild det är. Så vi jobbar i ett område med väldigt hög prisbild. Det är affärsidén går ut på att vi optimerar de här produkterna, förbättrar dem och ser till att vi får en typ av hävstångseffekt i form av att vi har en låg utvecklingskostnad och har en väldigt hög potential i försäljningen. Rätt låg risk, eftersom de här produkterna finns ju redan och testats i 15 år när vi kommer på marknaden. Vi märker också då att eftersom generika inte går ner i pris mer än 10-20% de första 2 åren, så betyder det också att vi med en bättre produkt kan lägga oss ungefär där originalprodukten ligger, och det kommer inte att bli något större priskrig i de första åren. På den tiden kommer vi hinna etablera vår förbättrade version och kunna klara av en nedgång i marknaden som eventuellt kan komma senare. Så slutligen då, det vi jobbar på och det vi ska prata om idag, det är första exemplet på den här utvecklingscykeln som vi har gjort. Vi har ju gått från att ta fram maskinen som har tagit den absolut längsta tiden för att få produktionskapaciteten, bli godkänd i Italien, bli godkänd i USA som vi väntar på nu, och det är den här ringen PDUFA date i 31 juli som ni ser på den här bilden. Och sen så är det upp med den kommersiella teamet på plats med Eversana, det som är så bra med dem, de kan accelerera upp den. Och sen så lansering 1 september efter att vi har kommit överens med BMS efter en patenttvist att vi kan komma in då. Igen, vi jobbar med mycket av vår affär, så det går ut på att vi jobbar med livshotande sjukdomar, och det är det som gör mycket av det här värdet. När det gäller TO6, alltså den warrant som går just nu, så hoppas jag att ni är med oss, att stödja oss för att ta det här till att vara en av de här, få till en kraftig och bra lansering som Ed och Adrian kommer att prata om alldeles strax. Så jag lämnar över här till Ed och Adrian för att kunna prata mer om detaljerna i hur det går med just Dasano, vår första i en serie utav produkter.
And next we switch to English and leave the word to Adrian. But before that, can you just briefly explain the relationship between Xspray and Eversana and the strategic significance of that?
Eversana is, maybe you can do that, Adrian.
No, you go ahead, Per. I can fill in the gaps.
No, I think that the good thing for us is that Eversana is a large organization in place with a fee-for-service type of business model. All the services that we need is there and can be switched on or switched off in fast pace. So we don't have to invest in a large infrastructure and then sit with that if something happens. And we can accelerate more if we need to. So I believe, and I must say that I'm impressed with the knowledge and the work that the Eversana has been showing so far. So anything to add there, Adrian?
No, Per, you've covered it, and I think it's important to say this is a dedicated team at Eversana. We work on this project. We feel that we're part of the Xspray team, so complete commitment from an Eversana perspective.
All right.
So now over to you, Adrian.
Great, thank you. So if we can have the first slide. I think it's really important for those on the line to understand the differences between the European and certainly the Swedish healthcare system and the US healthcare system, because that will probably help you understand why we're approaching it in a certain way and why we're able to capture some data that may not be so easy to capture in the European healthcare systems and the Swedish healthcare system. Within Sweden, it is a predominantly government-funded healthcare system, some small amounts of copay for patients, but the funding really comes through multiple streams, be it primary care, secondary care, medicines, etc. So while you get exceptionally good, and the Swedish registries and data is really recognized globally as being incredibly powerful, the one thing that it does that makes it more challenging is to understanding the whole treatment costs, because you've got multiple streams of budgets. The US system is different in that it's predominantly paid for by an insurance company. Commercial insurance companies are responsible for the majority of healthcare, and they insure patients for all parts of their treatment. So they are completely responsible for the whole patient journey. They're the ones that negotiate the costs with the providers, and patients are usually responsible for differing levels of copay. That code can be very low, but it can also be very high. So the system allows us, by looking at insurance-based databases, what the total cost of treatment is for every patient. They also allow us to track the patient journey based on the different providers through which they cycle. So it allows us to get incredibly important data. This data may not be as clinically deep as we see in the Swedish data, but actually, from a health economic perspective and for an overall pathway, it's very powerful. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on. If we can go to the next slide. Just a little bit about CML and what the scale of this opportunity is. CML it's a very large group of adult leukemias. About 15% of adult leukemias fall into this group. What is really important about CML is that it's got a very distinct target, which is the Philadelphia chromosome. What this is really is two parts of chromosomes break off and they essentially rejoin in the wrong position. It gives you a specific target. And this was really the first personalized approach. Once this was identified, it allowed us to develop targeted therapies focused on the Philadelphia chromosome. This resulted in the TKIs being developed and really significant improvements in patient outcomes. But you know, because it's a condition associated with age, with increasing age, the median age of diagnosis is somewhere between 60 and 64. It shouldn't surprise us that the incidence is growing. Next year in the US, we're anticipating over 9,000 new cases. which really your lifetime risk is about 1 in 500 patients will get CML. So a very significant condition, not only here in the US, but also globally. If we can go to the next slide. Now, one of the real challenges with CML is that there can be, dare I say it, an element of complacency, and that outcomes have improved so much. That, however, doesn't, in many ways, hides the fact there are still ongoing problems with medications with the tyrosine kinase inhibitors. One of the significant problems is drug-drug interactions. Because the current second-generation TKIs are formulated in crystalline form, they are really sensitive to pH changes. Crystalline drugs are very good. They're very good if they're very soluble. However, TKIs suffer from pH dependence. What does this mean? The lower the pH, the more acidic the environment, the more soluble they are. As the acidity in the environment reduces and your pH goes up, you get reduced solubility and therefore reduced bioavailability. Less is getting into the system. What does this mean for patients? Well, it means that they may be getting less of the drug they're taking, and that is exacerbated if you're taking acid-reducing agents. If you take acid-reducing agents, it raises the pH, you get less solubility, less bioavailability, and therefore that could have a significant impact on the outcomes for the patients. Now, is the concomitant use of acid-reducing agents a big problem? Well, we've seen from the Swedish data about 1 in 2 patients are taking concomitant acid-reducing agents. And in the US, that's about 1 in 3. But we have to be cautious that a large proportion of patients appear to be taking over-the-counter acid-reducing agents. These are available to purchase in your pharmacy. So this is almost certainly an underestimate of the scale of this problem. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what are the consequences of this? And there are many. Now, many of you will have seen the data that's presented from the Swedish registry, which is very impactful. And those of you who haven't read it, I would encourage you to look at it, or we can certainly make it available. Patients who co-medicated with a PPI, which is one of the acid-reducing agents, and a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, had a 15% reduction in 5-year survival. That is a really telling statistic. And it's when we were looking at the needs for the US-based patients, we went back to US data, and some of that insurance company-based data that I talked about earlier, which is why I want to highlight it, we can get an overall view of what's happening with patients. And we started looking at that. And now this data hasn't been published yet, but I can give you a sneak peek, essentially an overview of what we're seeing thus far. And really asking ourselves the question, what we saw in the Swedish data, is it consistent with what we see in the US data? And indeed, what we're able to see is that remission rates are reduced, and certainly that when you do get a remission, the time it takes you to get there is certainly extended. That is very important. Equally important, if you're not getting remissions in a timely fashion, is your disease under control or not? If your disease is not under control, you are likely to be to need hospitalization, more utilization of health services. And that's exactly what we appear to be seeing. You're more likely to be hospitalized and subsequently re-hospitalized. And when we look at the reasons for those admissions, it certainly seems clear that if you're on an acid-reducing agent, that reason for admission is more likely to be related to the underlying malignancy. So that was an important observation for us. But then we're also able to track how much is it costing, all these extra hospitalizations, re-hospitalizations, poor drug, overall condition control. And it certainly translates into significantly higher cost per patient. We're calculating the cost per patient per month across this, and it looks like a very significant per month cost increase if you're on a concomitant acid-reducing agents. And other data that's already been published has shown that actually poor treatment response leads to significantly higher medical costs anyway. So this is very consistent with what we see overall in the literature, very consistent with what we see in the Swedish registry. So we think once this is published, it'll be really important that we share this with you in more detail. If we can go to the next slide, please. So as Per has kind of talked about the HiNav technology, this is an important step forward for these patients and for the healthcare systems. Where we are right now, and I know Per shared the timeline in July, we're hoping to have an FDA approval with orphan drug designation. This will be for newly diagnosed patients in the chronic phase, or indeed other patients who are more advanced who will have failed the frontline therapy, including imatinib. So it is consistent with what we see for the Sprycel data. And of course, we haven't talked about it extensively, but an important group is also the Philadelphia chromosome positive ALL patients, which I think Ed might touch on in his presentation. What we're going to demonstrate is that we can get bioequivalence at a 30% lower dose, and I'll show you the data supporting that. Improved PK precision and less patient variability. Again, I'll show that, and what does it mean for how we launch, the likely success at launch, and the scale of the patient population who would benefit from Dasano. And again, the importance of the lack of drug-drug interactions with acid-reducing agent as a really important differentiator for Dasano as we move into the market. If we can look at go to the next slide, please. And the next one. Now, I'm going to show you some pharmacokinetic data. So for those of you who, many of you will be very familiar with pharmacokinetic data, but essentially pharmacokinetics is what the body does to the drug. What we want to see is that regardless of what other therapies you're taking, you're getting fairly consistent blood levels of your drug. What we see in the green box, if we give Dasano alone or Dasano in combination with one of the acid-reducing agents, a PPI in this case, what happens to the plasma concentration? Well, essentially nothing. There's no impact. This is telling us that regardless of what the gastric pH is, you're getting the required bioavailability, plasma concentrations you require of Dasano. Really important observation. Why is this important? Well, what we've seen with Sprycel, and this is data we produced, but this is consistent with all data you see in the public domain. If you do the same with Sprycel, what you can see is a very dramatic reduction in the availability of dasatinib from a bioavailability perspective. This is an important observation. Why? Because we believe that consistent absorption and bioavailability are critical if you want to get adequate disease control and you want to optimize your patient outcomes. So again, this is a very important observation. If we can go to the next slide. There's another part, I really wanted to highlight this, and this may seem like a complex slide, but it's telling us two important things. This is not looking at acid-reducing agents. It's looking at the general patient population that will require dasatinib. We look at two things. If we dose a patient, which you can see is the number 1, we measure their plasma concentrations, and then we do a washout and do the same thing and see, well, how consistent is the dose within that patient? We call that within subject variability. What we want to see is that we can predictably dose them, and when we dose them again, you're getting a similar outcome. So you're getting a flat line, ideally. The flatter the line, the better. The second thing we're looking at in this is the spread of the data, so that vertical spread. If we give it to one patient, we get a plasma concentration, then give it to another. How similar are they? Are they wildly different? So there's two things we want to see. We want to see flat lines and the minimizing the spread, because that's a measure of within subject or intra-subject variability, or between subject, inter-subject variability. What this is showing us is that really Dasano has a very much more favorable profile. You're getting far less intra-subject within the subject themselves and inter-subject variability when you compare with Sprycel. There's another really important observation here. We take a measure of 40%. If you've got variability above 40%, that's really considered very high variability. A far greater proportion of Sprycel patients, even without an acid-reducing agent, really have fairly dramatic reductions in their bioavailability. The message here is that this is giving you consistent absorption. but also across the broader patient population. This is not looking at patients on acid-reducing agents. This is the broader population. So we believe that there's huge, really important use for Dasano, not only in patients on acid-reducing agents, on all patients to really control that variability. We can go to the next slide, please. One of the obvious outcomes of improved absorption is that you do not need to dose as high. So this is comparing two doses. One is 140 milligrams in the dark blue bar. This is Sprycel with a 30% lower dose, 100 milligrams of Dasano. What you can see is you're getting pretty much the same concentrations. So this is, again, an important observation. Not only are you getting consistent lower variability, you're able to achieve these improved plasma concentrations at a 30% lower dose. We look at it in two ways. We look at the Cmax, which is how high does the dose go, and we look at the area under the curve, which is the overall exposure. They're remarkably consistent. So this, again, is a really important observation as we move forward. We're able to do this at a 30% lower dose. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we did touch on this earlier. This is the Swedish data from Lafur. This is showing a 50% lower over 5-year overall survival in patients who are taking concomitant PPIs. This is an important observation because, again, as we touched on, many people are quite complacent about the outcomes for patients with CML, but while this is a well-accepted issue, not many people have looked at the implication, the consequences of the concomitant use. This was a robust registry, 722 patients, and again, the depth of this data is very strong. This is really high quality data. A large proportion of these run a TKI, which gives us very good patient numbers. So this is already published, and again, this can be made available if anyone is interested in seeing it or hasn't already seen it. Again, for the next slide, we can go there. We have, again, repeated some of this looking at our healthcare databases in the US, and we've touched on this already, and we're seeing a similar trend occurring, but again, we can look at it slightly differently. We're seeing that delayed time to remission and lower remission rates. We're seeing a significant increase in the requirement of hospitalization and rehospitalization, and I think the third metric is if you are in hospital, you're there for slightly longer. But also the reason for admission is really related to it appears to be far more likely related to the underlying disease. Then when we measure that overall healthcare reutilization, we can really show an increase in cost associated with acid-reducing agents. We know that may have a significant impact on your overall outcome if you're not getting the early responses you need. So if we can go to the next slide, which I think is my final one. So what does it mean for the US, the broader US stakeholders? Well, hopefully I have made it clear to you this far that patients will certainly benefit if they are absorbing the drug they need to control their cancer. Then this should really hopefully result in better outcomes and at a lower dose. For providers, it certainly gives them the confidence that when when a patient is dosed, that dosing is going to be predictable and consistent, and therefore will give them the best chance of achieving the outcomes they want. The payers are also an important group. They like to know that a patient is absorbing the drug that they're paying for. So this certainly gives them an element of confidence. But added to that, the significantly lower per patient per month cost will be important to them. And I think will be a huge driver. And for pharmacies who really are, have a critical role here in the US in relation to drug-drug interactions, being able to dose these patients with acid-reducing agents without the uncertainty of what happens as they take the over-the-counter drugs also that we don't know about, this is hugely important for this group of patients also. So I think that's the end, and then there'll be a question and answer at the end, which I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to hand over to Ed, who will talk about our go-to-market strategy.
Thank you, Adrian. Much appreciated. My name is Ed Jordan, Chief Commercial Officer. Next slide, please. Let me share with you what excites me about this market. It's twofold. These are orphan conditions, which means they affect less than 200,000 patients. In fact, CML affects 66,000 patients in the US, ALL a little over 100,000. As Adrian mentioned, each year there are about 9,000 new CML patients and about 6,500 new ALL patients. And unfortunately, there are about 1,300 deaths each year for these conditions. So it's a small, addressable patient population, yet it's of significant economic value. If you looked at all the drugs for CML and ALL in the US, their sales approached $4 billion, 3.7 billion US. The CML market is growing at 12% per year, likely because of the aging population in the US. Sprycel, the product which we're looking to improve, is the market leader and enjoys a 53% market share. The WAC price, the selling price of Sprycel, is almost $219,000 per year, and the expected gross sales last year exceeded $2 billion. So again, a small patient population, yet significant economic value. Next slide. Here showed the timeline. We're in April now. In 3 months, in just 3 months, we should have a FDA decision on the approval of Dasano. And in 2 months later, in September, we will start to commercialize given the approval. Next slide. We're building the commercial infrastructure for Dasano, but it can be used for any of our products that we bring to market. In each subsequent launch, will benefit from the efficiencies gained from the prior products. So right now we are introducing Xspray to the US marketplace. We are establishing manufacturing in the United States, building our commercial infrastructure, our distribution model, hiring a customer-facing team to talk to doctors and pharmacists, developing relationships with the insurance companies, establishing the services which we will provide to patients, and getting to know the key opinion leaders in the States. And again, this infrastructure is leverageable and scalable. Next slide. We talked a little bit about Eversana and why we chose Eversana to be our partner in the US. Well, they're a leader in oncology, and they're an established end-to-end partner that is perfect for a company like Xspray. They have over 5,500 employees. They operate in 80 countries. They've been at this for almost 2 decades. They work with all the top biotech companies, and a good percent of their business is focused in oncology. So they're the right partner for us. Next slide. And as far as the deal terms, I believe it's the terms also align very, very nicely for a company like ours, where we enjoy 100% of the revenue of the product. We pay Eversana on a fee-for-service model. We don't have to establish huge infrastructure. We leverage theirs. We harness the experience of their established teams. There's no need for us to license the product with Big Pharma. It's a platform which we can leverage in the future for additional products. It's sizable, it's scalable, it makes sense for a company like Xspray. We're pleased with the work and the relationship. Next slide. We've been busy, and we've commissioned 3 individual rounds of research with physicians, pharmacists, and payers in the United States. And if I had to provide an executive summary, this is it. And simply the payers, they appreciate Dasano's value proposition, which Adrian just showed. They see it as an improved clinical product. They look at it as a premium product. CML, it's of low priority to them, given the fact it's a small population. Until now, there really wasn't a solution for the acid reducing agent and the liability that it brings. But when it's explained and shown to the payers and all the stakeholders, they appreciate the value of the advancement, and they also acknowledge the size of the population that it is occurring in the U.S. The payers tell us, hey, if you price this around Sprycel, you'll have access. As a matter of policy, when generics come out, they'll certainly put a generics first policy in place. But Dasano is not substitutable. It can't be interchanged on a milligram to milligram basis, and it will avoid us from being included in this policy. When physicians look at the product, 85% of them say, yeah, I'm willing to try it. In the large groups of oncologists, when they see the product, they acknowledge Sprycel's bioavailability liability. They also acknowledge Dasano's clinical value and acknowledge when it's properly distributed and priced, they'll utilize it. And the success overall is driven by, obviously, the clinical benefits, the economic benefits, and the services that we provide. And we're confident we can deliver on all three. Next slide. People often ask about, well, what happens to price when generics come out? So we've pulled together a few oncology analogs to share with you. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but I think these are quite applicable. Here's an example for imatinib. And after 24 months after generics entered the market, the price eroded by just 18%. 8% in the first year, 10% in the second year, for a total of 18% over 24 months. Not significant. Next slide, next analog. The next three slides are all laid out in the same format, so let me orientate you to this slide. The top line is the originator drug, in this case, Targretin. The blue vertical line is the 24-month mark, and then we measure what is the price erosion over 24 months, and you can see that in the bottom of the slide, 14%. So in this case, no generics entered within 24 months. One generic entered, and the price was 14% less, not significant. And these are all oncology agents. Next slide. Xylota. In this case, you can see the innovator took price increases over the first 24 months. There was a generic that entered, and over 24 months, price was eroded by 27%. Next slide. Sutent. After 24 months, price was eroded 36%, and there were multiple generics in the marketplace. Now, what you should keep in mind is all of these examples were pure generics with no innovation. The next example, next slide, is one that's more akin to the Dasano situation. Next slide, please. Now, in this case, the gray line, Bendecta, which is a 505(b)(2 with clinical advantages over the originator, much like Dasano over Sprycel, was introduced to the market with its clinical advantages. And its clinical advantage, I would say, was pretty simplistic. It was an infusion, and it could be infused in less time. And that was the only difference. But you can see they became the market leader despite multiple generics being in the marketplace after many years. And I would keep this model in mind when you think about Dasano. Next slide, please. So now back to the commercial market. 6% of oncology practices represent 65% of Sprycel sales. And again, this is likely different than what is available in Sweden and in Europe. I mean, we know exactly who the accounts are, who the providers are, where they're located, and what they are prescribing. So in this case, there's 436 accounts, which represents 65% of the sales. And we're going to focus on the 436 accounts. Next slide. Given the small number of 436 accounts, we can have a very targeted and streamlined sales team. And in this case, it's 15 sales territories. And we know exactly within each territory who are the biggest prescribers of Sprycel, and they'll be our key targets. Again, summarized with 436 accounts. Next slide. And the commercial success is driven by just four critical success factors: access, awareness, adoption, and infrastructure. And we are building and advancing all of these right now. Distribution, contracting, talking to payers, developing a very strong clinical message, which you just heard. All this information will be published and it will be presented at leading medical congresses. We are engaging with practices. We're talking about a sales force, getting people into the field, engaging with customers, presenting at societies, and building the infrastructure, leveraging the Eversana infrastructure needed to launch a very successful product. And next slide. And we believe that Dasano is delivering value, checking the boxes with all the major stakeholders. The pharmacies, they're going to get a high quality product without drug interactions. The patients are going to get a product which will likely lead to better outcomes. Providers will know that their patients are getting the correct dose that they prescribed. Payers will enjoy economic efficiencies, and Xspray will enjoy profits. The 5 Ps. I believe that's, and then the next slide. And as clearly seen, our vision for 2030 is sales in excess of $400 million, a very impressive profit margin, 5 commercialized products, 3 under development. And we believe in 2030 we can achieve this. I think that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ed, and thank you, Adrian. And before we go over to Per's concluding remarks, we will have some questions. And I will start up with going back to Adrian's presentation and the interesting availability of data on health economics. And I wonder, Adrian, if you can help us just to sum up the health economic argument, to give us a short summary of what in fact is the health economic argument and how does that work in favor of Dasano.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So hopefully, as I touched on, there's a few key areas. One is initial disease control, getting to where you need to be. The second is hospitalization, rehospitalization rates. They are really the big drivers of the cost. So from a health economic perspective, again, given that this is all run through an insurance company, we can get a very, very detailed overview of all costs. We can capture the whole patient journey. what we're able to show, given that there's significantly fewer hospitalizations, now hospitalizations in the US are a very large driver of costs, as are rehospitalizations and those the underlying conditions. We would expect to be able to demonstrate a saving per patient per month, which would be quite significant. What is considered significant, and we talked to the payers about this, is about a $2,000 saving over a 6-month period. They feel that that would be fairly significant, and that's really what their expectation would be. We would anticipate, and again, we're working through this data, we would anticipate that we can deliver those kind of savings per month rather than over a 6-month period. So we believe that once this data is published in the hopefully fairly near future, we will see compelling health economic arguments that we will have as we go to market here in the US.
You want to add?
No, I think that it's from my perspective as a Swede, I'm sort of isn't it the medical cost, the medicine cost in the US is sort of 4% of the total health cost, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, it's probably a little higher now, actually, Per. It's probably gone
Because
up
of
a
the
little higher.
PPIs.
It is one of the biggest issues. I mean, the cost of healthcare here, and I think I'm a European, so when I came here, I was quite shocked at the healthcare costs. But yes, it's a significant issue. So, yes, we've got a compelling clinical argument, but I would think that the really important bit that we're going to be able to show is this huge amounts of savings for the healthcare economies, huge amount of savings for the insurance companies.
But it's based on the fact that they in one bit look at both hospitalization and the medicine cost at the same time, which we might not be as good as in Sweden, for example.
Exactly. You get a holistic view. And I think that's the one challenge we have in European healthcare systems, given that you have multiple budgets covering different parts of the care. Given that you have one payer covering the medicine cost, the outpatient appointments, the surgical costs, the whole treatment journey, we can really capture that very well.
Right. So I suppose this highlights the importance of the payers and their role. And I wonder, can you please help us be a little bit more specific and help us understand a little bit more about the role of the payers? Who are the payers? Who do you need to convince? And how do you know whether you've been successful? When do you know if you've been successful? Maybe that's a question for Ed. Please.
Sure. Who are the payers? The payers are large insurance companies. So some names that you might recognize: Aetna, Humana, United Healthcare, Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Those are the biggest insurers in the United States. They each have a P&T, a Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, and those committees decide what products are available for their members, their patients. We'll leverage a dedicated team through Eversana that has relationships with these payers, Humana, Aetna, United, and such. We will present the medical and clinical information to them. We've already researched this with them, and they see the advancement that Dasano brings. And I'm sure they'll be quite interested in the economics as well. So how do we know if we're successful? It's quite easy. We will gain their feedback after the meetings. We will engage in negotiations with them, sign a contract, and gain access for their members. And it's a process which we are initiating now.
So thank you, Ed. And also this is, of course, an important target and contact group. But I see from the questions we get in the YouTube chat that there may be some confusion as to the numerics of the number of patients and the addressable market for Dasano. So can you just quickly just remind us what the numerics are that constitute the addressable market for Dasano, please?
Yeah. There are 66,000 patients who suffer from the disease currently. Every year, there are about 9,000 that are newly diagnosed. and patients that are on therapy or those that are newly diagnosed will be considered candidates for Dasano.
Right. And also, as a portion of those, we have a fair idea of how many of those use concomitantly PPIs or
acid reducing agents.
Yeah.
PPIs are one of them.
Right.
We have done this analysis. We've done the analysis in Sweden, where it demonstrated about 1 in 2 were on an acid reducing agent. We've done the analysis in the United States, where approximately 1 in 3 are on an acid reducing agent. But please let me re-emphasize that are patients that are just on prescribed acid reducing agents. And many of them are also on over-the-counter acid reducing agents, which their physician may or may not know they're on. So those numbers are likely quite underestimated.
Right.
But Ed, if we get down to the spray sales type of sales numbers, we have every month 10,000 patients on spray cell, right? On the brand.
That's exactly correct.
And then they getting 400 new ones every month.
Correct.
And those are the ones that you are currently focusing on, with exception for the broad band of patients coming in.
Now we'll focus on the newly diagnosed first that are coming in. We'll focus on those that are currently on a concomitant acid reducing agent, and potentially patients who may need an acid reducing agent in the future.
So that's 100 or 200 patients a month coming in on dasatinib right now.
Could be.
Right. Did you want to add something, Ed? No. Right. You get another chance. We get some questions also about competition in the YouTube chat, and I think you gave an interesting and convincing benchmark study on what's happening when competition arises. But is there anything specific you can say about the competition situation for Dasano and maybe also the patent situation for Dasano?
Sprycel will have generic competition, but we need to separate ourselves from that. The generics of Sprycel will have the same bioavailability liabilities that Sprycel has. So they're not going to bring a clinical advancement to the arena. We will bring something of significant value there, where we can be dosed at a lower, 30% lower. We enjoy better PK bioavailability, and that means patients get the dose that they are required. And lastly, we will not have this drug-drug interaction with acid-reducing agents, which include PPIs, antacids, and H2s.
Anything about competition?
Yeah, that is. We will be the only product on the market as it looks right now with that covers the whole range of anti-acid and RAS, acid reducing agents. There is another product that is a 505(b)(2) product that is likely to launch as well, but it's not having the same profile as we have.
Right. So maybe on another chapter, on another perspective, but we also get some questions about the regulatory journey. Is there anything we can say about
the CRL?
The CRL and what's to expect before the PDUFA date, if there's any news from the FDA?
Sure.
this specific?
Seems like I'm going to answer that one. Our regulatory team is working with FDA, of course. We are in contact with them. The major task there was the dose question, the possibilities of since we have a more potent drug, we have to. In my world, we're not wasting 30% of the tablet down the toilet. We're using it. We get it into the bloodstream, which means that there becomes a small issue with that the doctor has to know that this dasatinib is 30% more potent than the other, or the formulation. So that's being cleared out with a study that was going well. The doctors know how to transfer the different doses. Right, Ed? That study was going well, so we don't see any big issues coming out.
Right. We're on track. We're having discussions with the agency, and we anticipate a PDUFA date in just 3 months.
Okay. So, and also on the financial side, we have some questions, and for obvious reasons, I don't think we're not going to get you to disclose any specific forecasts, but you come a long way now with equity financing, and as we speak, the shareholders are subscribing to the TO6 series warrants. Is there anything in general you can say about the expectation on do you anticipate a scenario where Dasano in fact can generate revenue that will make you self-sufficient in developing the forthcoming products in the portfolio?
Maybe Ed should answer that. He's the one responsible for the sales figures, so coming up without giving any prognosis. Ed?
Yeah, I would say a very, very small percent of the newly diagnosed patients will make us, will have us in a break-even position.
Yeah, that sounds like you think that he can reach that.
Okay, and you said before you've been making references to additional sources of financing that will be available and improving as you approach the market.
So right now the TO6 is used to strengthen the launch period coming up. And then there's going to be good possibilities of non-dilutive financing. That is very common after you have launched. So I think that we're in a good position.
Yeah. So we covered a lot, and we're kind of running out of time. But do we have any questions from the audience in the room? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you regarding the ARA issue. You have been providing very interesting insights. I was wondering, how will this advantage be reflected in the prescribing information or in the label?
Is that for you, Adrian?
Yeah, so right now, when we look at our second generation TKIs, there are warnings about concomitant use in relation to acid reducing agents. Many of them PPIs, antacids, and as I said earlier, H2 antagonists. We anticipate that we will not have any warning related to any, and I stress any, acid reducing agents, which means that it certainly will remove any sort of risk from a prescriber's perspective. Many prescribers currently still have to prescribe acid-reducing agent in spite of regulatory warnings and in spite of the potential downside. So this, I think, would be a huge, huge differentiator within from a regulatory perspective. That is our anticipated outcome, and as the data we've shown you, that position will be strongly supported by the data we submitted.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Adrian, we'd also anticipate the lower dose and PK precision being included in the label as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're approaching the end of this. Yes, Philip, we have room for one question.
Okay, it will be a short one. I mean, you covered most of it already, but I thought I could take the chance when we have both Adrian and Ed on the line. So you mentioned 436 accounts in the US. Approximately how many sales reps would that be?
We'd probably go out with about 15.
And also another short one. You discussed the orphan drug designation, but could you give some answer with both of you online here? How does that impact commercially in a product like Dasano? Anything you can help us with there?
Well, I think the fact that it's a small patient population treated by a small number of physicians allows us to go out with a streamlined and targeted customer-facing team, which means lower costs.
Yeah.
It's a very identifiable patient population and physician universe, which is good.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for the questions. We'll be happy to answer any further questions via the online availability, so you can just mail your questions or get in touch via the website, and then we'll reply, because now the time for questions is up for this session, and I leave the word to Per to make some concluding arguments.
Härligt, och jag går tillbaka till svenska. Det jag tycker är jättespännande med det här, framförallt den senare diskussionen, det är att när det gäller den här typen av PPI-interaktioner, alltså omeprazol och cancerläkemedel, när det inte finns någon lösning på det, då används det tillsammans ändå. Och då jag frågade mig i början när vi började gå ut till läkare, och de kände inte till det här problemet riktigt, och vi insåg att det här kommer vi bli tvungna att utbilda dem till. Så jag frågade mig själv lite grann, varför är det så? För det är ju mer vi tittar i det nu, som ni hör av Adrian och Eds jobb, så ser vi att det här är rätt stora konsekvenser av det. Men som någon vis man till exempel på svenska CMO sa här, det blir ju så här, när man har PPI-interaktioner som förändrar hur mycket upptaget är utav dasatinib, då blir ju liksom sidoeffekterna, de blir ju dasatinib-liknande. Det blir ju liksom inte så att en arm ramlar av så man tydligt ser det. Utan det blir ju samma typ av problematik som föreningen har i sig, och den är ju högvariabel som det är. Så det är inte förrän man får lite data, lite mer rejäl data, och sen har någon som är intresserad av att titta på det. Nuvarande bolag är väl inte jätteintresserade av att titta på antiacids, för de kan ju inte göra någonting åt det, så att ni löser ju inte det fallet. Så det krävs liksom att man börjar titta på det för att se vad det egentligen är, och då får man också det här utbildningsdelen. Så att jag tror att det här kommer att följa med oss när vi går in i de här typerna utav nya förbättrade produkter. Vi kommer att titta på någonting som ingen annan har tittat på. Oj, vad vi hittar. Och nu hittar vi rätt mycket saker där, och därför tror jag att det här kommer att bli en jättespännande resa, både framförallt för patienterna faktiskt, men också för oss. Och med det tror jag vi kan avsluta.
Ja. Då tackar vi för mycket matnyttig information. Vi tackar för att ni har tittat och deltagit online, och tack för er som har kommit hit idag för att ni har deltagit. Och vi ses nästa gång.
Tack så mycket.